Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Easy Peasy Books podcast. And today I have a friend and colleague and someone I so admire in the house today, and that is Michelle B. Griffin. And before we get stuck in with our topic, Michelle, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do?
Jillian, so good to be here again. I'm so honored. Yeah, so Michelle B. Griffin, this B stands for brand, and that's what I help people do, especially experts and leaders, and especially women who I love helping just get visible, build their brands and their thought leadership with my professional speaking, advising, books, and podcasts. So, like educational. How to get visible and how to get noticed and get the opportunity. So, I'm delighted to be here on this topic we're about to get into.
I love it. I love it. So instead of talking about a specific book journey today, we are talking about something that is near and dear to authors, near and dear to thought leaders. So this is something that Michelle comes across working with her clients, and I, of course, come across working with authors. And we thought there was a great marriage of how we could, come to the table and talk about it. And that is the importance of owning your intellectual property. If you think about it, your brand is your brand because you own the rights to everything about you. And so, Michelle, why don't we kind of start off with, I know this kind of comes up in conversations with your clients. So, do you want to kind of just walk us through why would we even want to talk about this, as an author, as a thought leader? Why is this important?
Well, let's even back up a bit because 3 months ago, 3 years ago this month, something called ChatGPT has now entered our lives, and AI and the LLMs have become such a mainstay. And what that means is content is even more of a commodity. In a nanosecond, you can get any information. So, how do we distinguish, differentiate our expertise? And what I've always believed in is having some kind of branded idea, method, system, framework that is so unique to you that you own it. Perhaps you wrap your entire business, speaking, author, books, training, consulting, anything around it. And so, top of mind, people know you. We can think back and some examples that come top of mind because I was once one 5 years ago is Story Brand, right? Donald Miller is synonymous with Story Brand. Simon Sinek is Start with Why. I could just go on and on. Brene Brown, Mel Robbins, all of them have frameworks, and you become known and stand out. And so that's why when I work with clients, and even when I speak and teach, I propose find a way to stand out with your unique idea and point of view.
I love that. I love that. And just to just in case somebody doesn't understand that term framework, can you define that for us? Because sometimes we use terms and we realize somebody listening is like, what does that mean? I feel
No,
dumb.
that's so smart. And I like to make something so clear in what I do. And that is a framework, a system, a roadmap, a unique way you put your intellectual property together. You could even call it a name or something that you've connected a dots, a process, maybe a solution, a formula. So it's a methodology. It can be interchangeable, but it's the unique way you see something and you solve a problem the way you only see it and know how to do it. It's unique to you. And you just start owning that, if you will. And I have seen that work with so many people. And it's easier to teach and write about with content. Heck, it's easier to write your book that way. And it just makes a clear method for people to understand what you're here to help them with.
I love that. I love that. And so with you, do you have an example of anything that you have is a framework with a name?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, and sometimes these can evolve. So I'll give you a little bit of history. Back in 2019, before I left my job and started my consultancy and speaking business, I was speaking here locally and I was asked to speak at an IT conference. And I developed something, it was called Own Your Message, because I saw in my job at the time was putting on events, so many brilliant people struggle to communicate what they do. And so I developed the 7-step framework back then. I kind of taught it and I, went over well that day. And then when I became my own business owner and my own thing, I started bringing that into my coaching. And just over the course of, and this is so normal and what I recommend your listeners and viewers do, it could evolve. Like, so the more I started using it and realizing, especially when that chat GPT came out, we need even more simpler steps. So I worked hard even last year when I was writing my second book to really get that into a smaller framework. It was just, it took a lot of time, and I even made an acronym out of it, own your lane, the recognition roadmap, if you will. And that really, things started popping when I got it down to 4. You know why? Because it's easier to remember 4 things than 7. So I have mine called Own Your Lane in the Recognition Roadmap, and I put it out in a Position Yourself Planner last year, a book which you helped me with coaching. So I got that out into the world, and that has been synonymous. Once I got into the world in the book, it became the ecosystem for all I do. And that even moving forward, it's evolving just a little bit more as well.
I love that. And the title of your book, Position Yourself, is amazing, because that's exactly what this is all about. It's positioning yourself as the thought leader. And so that's why you want to own your intellectual property, because what can happen is somebody can come along and start using your phrases. And so for me, Easy Peasy Books podcast, I recently rebranded my company. And so I went from Video Easy Peasy to Easy Peasy Books, because now I own the space of the podcast. It's my website. It's everything all aligned. And everybody knows Easy Peasy, you think of Jillian. So I don't own Easy Peasy as a trade name. And I actually did a little bit of research. And for anybody listening, Michelle and I are not lawyers. So we're going to make a disclaimer that anything we say today, it's like we're just sharing what we know, what we've researched, what we've learned. But, there's a fine line between us giving legal advice and us giving marketing advice. So there's a fine line. But I know I was doing some research, and one of the things that I found is that it's very difficult to copyright a slogan. So Easy Peasy, if you think about it, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, like it's used everywhere. So that's very hard. But Easy Peasy Books, LLC, is something that's legally registered in the state of Texas. Nobody else can use that but me. So, that's just, that has nothing to do with being an author, but that's just something of showing that, you can pick a name and just be using it. But if you don't have any kind of ownership, whether it's, a copyright of your book or, trade names and different things, you're all good until somebody comes along and that's where the problem happens, is when somebody all of a sudden, I've got my book out there in the world, and then somebody else has a book with the same title. Guess what? I don't have a legal leg to stand on, because you can't copyright a title. But
Yes, but you can
book.
Book series for sure. Yes. And that's when I work with clients, I work with a lot of, speakers and authors who really need to position their brand. Even, people in corporate, they have these frameworks they want to speak with, a lot of them. And I tell them, hey, the minute we finesse that and you really feel comfortable with this name, it's going to stick. Don't walk, but run. Go look at. I love just a little tip for your listeners. I go to like trademarkia.com or uspto.gov and just kind of put in those words and see what's out there. In fact, when I've helped clients develop their frameworks and some really good names, I go straight there, because I'm like, I want to make sure this is clear and wide open. There'd be no friction that we can. And then I ask them to, use ChatGPT and Google and just all the social media and just go search everywhere to see. And I'm not saying you wouldn't get it, but to see if it's a crowded market, because it'll be harder to stand out if that same name just sounds like everyone else, perhaps in the same industry. And that's what I like to do as well for me. And once you feel good about that, go ahead and file a application with the trademark office. It takes months. It can almost take a year for them to even look at it. So you want to protect yourself the moment you decide on this, because you don't want to wait, because you never know who's going to come up and jump in before you. Even if you were owning that title and that thing well before them, it could just get into a really messy situation. So, I believe it's like $350 just for the application. It's not much in the scope if you're going to monetize this and you want to be known for this. It's a small price to pay for that ownership and authority, if you will.
I love that. I love that. And it's so true that it's like the things that are important to you, that's what you follow through on. That's what you make sure I'm going to do that. And like you might even like you mentioned a second ago about you can copyright a series. I think actually I did a little research on that too, and it's like it's issued as a trademark for a series, which is really interesting
Mhm.
because it's just like you think, oh, wouldn't you go through the copyright to do a book series? And it's like, no, that's a trademark. And you might say, well, why on earth would I even want to do that? So it's like, I'll have one of the most famous one is the dummies books, those dummies books on, using word, and, there's a whole series. Harry Potter series is trademarked. These things are so important. And so I always encourage authors, if you can, think of your books. Can they be part of a series? Because then when you read one, people will naturally want to read the next one. And Amazon does such a great job of like doing that. And you know what? The secret sauce is you can always have just one book to start with. It's not like you have to write all five at the same time. Start with one, but you can put your book as a series. And if you really want to own it, you might want to consider going and doing a trademark. So,
Yeah, and going back to what you said, I always encourage make that authority ecosystem. If you're an author, a lot of them like to speak, consult, train, whatever. It becomes part of their business model. So why not make it? You can. I mean, I'm not a tax attorney or tax accountant either, but most likely it's a business expense you could probably write off too, and it's just a small price to pay for peace of mind. And it really does help you stand out. It
yes.
really does. You're like, you're seen even above someone. You have a framework. To me, that signals, wow, this person really has a really system. Like it's a whole model they put together to elevate you. So it's something like, believe it or not, many of us probably already are doing this anyway. If you're writing a book, perhaps you've have the system already in there. You don't even recognize it. I was working with a client recently. He was bringing his book out because he wanted me to help him with some positioning and stuff like that. And I looked at his stuff and I said, you know what? You've got two different models here. What if you combined it? He hadn't gone to print or anything yet, he's in first draft mode. It's like, what if you just put it in one framework, one simple 4 steps, going back to when I had 7. And you know what? He looked at it. He's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much more sense because he wanted to really elevate his speaking too. So we worked through that. And he's in Canada. So he's going to look into getting that trademarked in his country. But he did that. And so that's something too. You may have something, or it could be long. And maybe now is the time to think, maybe I have something there.
Mm, mm. That is so good. That is so good. So have you, when you're working with clients, is there kind of like common misconceptions or blunders that you just go, oh, I wish they talked to me before, or anything like that, where you've kind of seen people go, oops, what happened there?
Yeah, well, first, make sure you're talking about from like protecting it or
Yes.
creating it. Okay. Yeah, I would say, go do it as soon, see what's out there because I know some people, I worked with clients before and they were starting to use something and they hadn't done their due diligence and it really their framework sounded so much like others or there was another one already there and I'm like don't go down that avenue. Just we'll find it so we tweak some things and it just made sense. So really do the homework to see, does this fit me? Does this fit a vision where I want to go? It could serve you right now, but let's think bigger and long term. And so you need to look at that, see what's out there and just see, is this the easiest way possible? Another thing too, I've worked with clients, they'll try to do an acronym thing. It doesn't always work that way, right? You get a pillars or a diagram or visual thing. And maybe, they've made it just seems awkward, the diagram, or excuse me, the acronym doesn't really fit. So don't just slop it together. Sometimes it's even makes sense to kind of use it a little bit like I did and see the kinks and see what makes sense so that you can refine it. So I know I said run, go walk, but also just make sure that it's good enough. You can always, put another trademark in too down the road. But I mean, I just don't waste time on this.
Mm.
Don't say, I'll do it tomorrow. Okay. I'm taking this from personal experience. Don't just say, oh, look, no one else is doing it. I'll get to that later. I'm going to tell you right now, you might seriously regret it because you just never know. One day it'll just pop up. Someone put in that application on a IP and work that you've been building so long, and that can get really messy.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And, I forget the expression, but there's something like, a penny of prevention is worth a pound of cure or something like that. And it's so true. And I remember when I was publishing this book, which is From Expert to Author, I love the title. That like the title just popped in my head from like the day one when I started writing it. And it was just like, okay, I'm gonna go with this as my title. And I remember I was like, is all ready to go and this and that. And I was, getting my ISBN and I registered my ISBN. And then when I was uploading to Amazon, I saw that there was other people that had that in their title. Now, you can't copyright a title, so it's okay, and that's when I learned, okay, I'm not going to get in any trouble, but I don't know if I really positioned myself well by having a book title that is similar than other people's, even though the subtitle is different. And I thought, well, I'll go change it, right? Well, I went back and I found out I had already assigned the ISBN.
Mhm.
And so that means like 100 and something dollars. I would like might as well just set fire to it. And I just went, "Ugh," and it's already typeset. And it was just like ready to go with the paperback and the ebook and this and that. And I just went, okay, take the learning experience
Yeah.
here for your next book, have a working title, but call it a working title. And then before it goes to, the typesetter, that's when make sure you do that research because maybe things could change.
Yeah.
So, Google it, go on Amazon, check to see if there's other things. And, it could be that like a book will be like, oh, it's like, well, other things have, but they're different topics, so you
Mhm.
might be okay. But it's like, if you had a book and it was about branding and somebody else had a book about branding and you were calling it well, you have the LinkedIn branding book. So it's like, you guys got it. But it's like, if I went and did it, it would be ridiculous because I would be competing against you and you guys are so well established. So, these are things, like you said, do the research because you never know, what could happen in the future.
No, that's a good point. And I'd even, like you said, go check Amazon, Bowker,
Yes.
um, uh, ChatGPT, go check all social handles, podcasts, and just put in, listen notes anywhere and everywhere that you can think, Audible, anywhere. And you can see, and that here's the thing that's sort of related because when that happens to you, my first year, my podcast, it was the business of you in 2021, all about personal branding. Well, I was really disappointed to see that someone brought out soon thereafter. I had several episodes published, the Business of You, another personal branding podcast. And I'm thinking, gosh, don't you do your due diligence? It was so annoying. I just have such a strong, so I ended up changing mine because I'm like, I was here first, but I'm not going to be blended in. So, just claim it first. Maybe sometimes people are going to copy you, but, maybe I should have said first, but, relating to this person on the podcast, it's like, did they even do their due diligence? Do they
Mm.
even realize that is because you want to stand out? At the end of the day, you want to claim your authority, be the one they remember for the solution and stand out. You don't want to have someone Google it and go, oh, well, which one are they? There's like 5 of you. So having your own framework protected will help you establish yourself and differentiate yourself.
I love that. I love that. And you and I have, on a personal note, have often said, GoDaddy is our friend. Whenever we're looking for something, we go to GoDaddy because you could maybe choose. A lot of people like to do a website to go with their
Mhm.
book. I don't do
Mhm.
that, but a lot of people do it, and they'll actually, put up a landing page. And there's many, many reasons why you might want to have that. And a lot of times people might have bonuses and they might have videos and it's kind of a lead magnet. So you'd read somebody's book, maybe you click a link or you scan a QR code and it goes off to a website that's similar in title to the book. Well, then you want to go to GoDaddy and make sure that that domain's available, because imagine if people just kind of Google your book and they go to some guy's website and you're just like, but that's not me.
Exactly. And also, too, I've gotten to this too. When you do buy the domain, you want to make absolutely certain, that it's yours in the clear, and you want to keep it long term because some of these extensions can be expensive, and maybe you decide to change. And you're like, God, why am I buying all these extra domains? So another thought I've had is just maybe make it under your business or personal brand site, and then do slash whatever the book title is. That
Mhm.
way you're not paying a lot of, because I've actually written a lot or read books where that link is broken.
Mm.
And it's a little disappointing if you wanted the material. I mean, sometimes it can be several years and you kind of get that, but just think, what is that long-term situation? So these are all parameters we want to think about, and for what works for us, our vision, our growth, we're envisioning, and our future readers. And it's not hard when you get it right, but there's things we're addressing today that I really think people may not realize. You and I've been have going through some of this.
Yes. And I think that the biggest takeaway, of course, is there are attorneys out there that
Yeah.
specialize in this. And, so you don't want just your regular family law, attorney. You probably want to get, somebody who specializes in it. Maybe if you're going to deal with somebody who does trademarks and trade names and stuff, maybe find somebody who specializes in books if you do a book or
Mhm.
something like that, because there's probably even specialties within the specialties. But a lot of this stuff is doable on your own. And I can tell you, I'm raising my hand. I did my own copyright with the US Copyright Office. It was cheap. It was 65 bucks. It wasn't that expensive. I filled out a form online. They require that you deposit a copy of the book. So you have to send them 2 copies of your finished book. And then that goes off to the Library of Congress. And it's like, oh, I just love the fact that my book's sitting in the Library of Congress. That makes me happy. And that was a relatively painless process where trademarks and trade names, that gets
Mhm.
a lot more expensive. So even doing a copyright is simple. And I just want to qualify, you do not need to register a copyright. Every book, as soon as you start writing your book is actually protected by copyright law. It's
Mhm.
it's if you want to sue somebody, that's when you
Mhm.
want to make sure that your book is registered with the Copyright Office, because that way you can, you can serve a lawsuit and you can sue. You can sue for damages and legal fees and all that sort of stuff. And there's just a little bit of trivia. If you do it within the first 3 months of your book being published, it's actually better. You get more protection. But even outside of that 3 months, you can do it now. So if I wrote a book 3 years ago and I say, "You know what? I think I'd really like to copyright that book just because I just want to, make sure I do it." You can go back and do it. So there's no time limit on when you can go back and copyright. It's just better within the first 3 months, because I think you can actually get more money if you're ever in a lawsuit.
Oh, that's good to know. I didn't know that. And yeah, so we're giving marketing, personal advice on kind of what happened to us. I would definitely, if this is something you want to do, consult with a trademark lawyer, especially those that maybe deal with thought leadership, speaking, authors, that kind of stuff. Because that's a whole different intellectual property, than maybe your business name or whatever. It's your stuff. It's your baby. It's your thoughts, unique to you, and someone who recognizes and has a track record with that. And, just find the right fit. And you can, have calls and talk, and just, should have a really good working relationship and communication with your legal counsel, whoever you select. But definitely take it on. It's a small investment in the scope of things, especially when you see first off, this is what you want to do. No one's doing it. Jump on it. Go for it. Could take months before the trademark is even looked at. And so you want to, timestamp that as soon as possible, and move forward with it. And then, once you get that approval, it's such a good feeling, to get that it's yours. And you can even, take it to whole new levels, monetize with it. And it just elevates you to a whole nother category with your own IP, and, trademarked.
I so agree. And, one extra thing too is I was talking to somebody recently and we were talking about self-publishing versus traditional publishing versus hybrid publishing. And hybrid publishing is basically you outsource everything to somebody else, but then essentially you're almost giving away in my opinion, your intellectual property, because they're going to publish your book with their publishing imprint, and your publishing imprint is what actually goes on your book. It's like when you get when you get an ISBN with Bowker or whatever country you're in, but when you go ahead and you purchase your ISBN, you actually are saying, I want it published under this imprint. And you don't usually use your name because this is kind of not good for
Mhm.
PR. You want to have a company. And
Mhm.
so that's much better, where you're either using your company, you can use a fictitious company, you can call it, I could call it Easy Peasy Books Press. Then I might want to think about, do I want a DBA in case I ever take money for it or something? So, that's it can be a little bit different. But anyways, that is another way to brand yourself and own
Yes.
yourself. And you can actually create like a little graphic if you want, a logo. You could, do stuff and put it inside your book or on the back cover. But that's again another way of, just your publisher name, which is, if you're self-publishing and you own your ISBNs, you can do that. So that is another way to position yourself and own your intellectual property. So that's always the caveat when people say, oh, I'm just going to go off and use the hybrid publisher. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, what happens if you don't like that book and you want to take it down? That's not in your control. That's not in your control.
Oh, yeah. All last year I was interviewing a lot of different publishing entities, and boy, I like to say, the Wild West out there. And you can be taken if you got to know and school yourself and know the right things. So I'm so glad you brought that up. You could save someone potentially a lot of headaches and money just by knowing these things. And it's important. And some people, it's like, that's what I want, or I want to be published by a traditional house. So you respect that. But for a lot of the business clients I have, they just want to get their business book out there and start speaking and teaching and whatever around it. So, that it's faster that way too, much faster. So
Absolutely.
self-publishing. So
That's good. That's good. So always, begin with the end in mind. And
yeah.
before you go down one particular road, really think about it. And especially with, self-publishing versus, hybrid publishing. What if they go out of business? What would happen?
Oh, yeah.
Like you think about that. Well, what would happen with my book if that company goes under? Or, nowadays, sometimes even a lot of them could be sketchy. And you're
Mhm.
just like, okay, they never even published my book. I gave them all this money and they disappeared.
Well,
So
we both know people that has happened to
yes,
personally.
yes,
Yes. Or
yes,
they just shut down communication. It's scary. So yeah. And then even if you have a contract, fighting that would be a mess. So I've known two former clients that walked away from their publishers, you
yes,
know? So yeah. So so protect yourself, with trademarks and all the publishing entities. Just do your homework. You want to set yourself apart, and intellectual property that's branded and a book and all these things just really add to the credibility of you becoming a standout author. And I know that's what you teach and preach as well, Jillian.
absolutely. And probably the final note is, I would want to say, respect other people's intellectual property too, because it's kind of like the golden rule: do unto others as you would like done to you. And so if you're going to if you're going to publish a book and you've got photographs, make sure you have the permission of the person who took, never make any assumptions. Always make sure that, like, you get that release, get it in writing. You don't want to just say, hey, is it okay? It's like, could you please send me an email so I have documentation, because
Yes.
we just never know. So, you can't just Google an image and throw it in your book. That's stealing. So, they're just very important to, think about all those things. So before we wrap up, can you tell us, Michelle, what's going on in your world and sort of what's next for you? What's going
Oh,
on in your world?
well, thank you. Well, I'm developing with my framework a new kind of lens for my speaking work that I'm working on for this coming year. So that's been good, and workshops. So I'm working on that. And then, working on that third book with that intellectual property, because the first one was kind of like the planner version, and this is more the mainstream. So I'm working on that, and, just getting really clear and tight and narrow of, I'd say for authors who are also business owners and speakers, not where am I now, but where do I want to go in the next year and two? Because a lot of this business and speaking and writing, it's a harvest thing. You don't just, you got to plant the seeds and just keep writing and doing outreaching, doing all the things. It's not a next day success thing. So I think keep that in mind. We tend to want instant, but then you have to be patient, make sure everything's planted and nurtured and relationships built to where you want to go. So looking forward to that. And thank you for having me on again. And it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And this has been a marvelous conversation. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. And then everybody, please come back next week for another episode of Easy Peasy Books Podcast.